watching Dro TV. Welcome back to the Cannabis Show. I'm your host, Mike Freeman, and today we have a very special guest, America's most trusted and beloved lawyer, Legalman. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
First, I want to say that you have helped me tremendously over the last 3 years, mostly with hearing the uncomfortable truths, coming to grip with reality, and so that I wake up in the right order. So thank you for that.
Well, you're most welcome. I'm glad I could help a little.
And the information that's in your show I'm a Patreon member, but for the little bit that we do shekel out, it's invaluable and you can't put a price on it. So again, I guess we can start with a quick rundown of your background and your podcast, The Quash.
Yeah, well, I am a lawyer. A lot of people wonder about that. I think any lawyer who listens to my show knows I'm a lawyer, but practiced for more than 30 years, almost 35 years now. And I've done all sorts of different stuff. And back when the pandemic hit, I kind of thought foolishly that the people were a lot smarter than I had estimated, and figured that, this stupid 15 days of flatten the curve thing, the fools, they'd run home, they all scared, and they'd do some research and they'd realize it was crap. And that didn't happen, not even close. And so when it became obvious that this was a new way of life, I started the podcast to try to tell people some of the truths that I've figured out over many, many, many years of studying, and that I never, ever hear people actually talking about. I hear some people who clearly understand a decent amount. It's not like I'm the only person who understands anything, but as far as actually explaining the way the legal system works and the way the system is actually sort of procedurally, fundamentally put together, there's just nobody else that does it, and that I've ever found. And the people who get close, they always go off the rails in some kind of way, and makes me very suspicious of them. But anyway, that's kind of my background.
Awesome. I 100% agree. There's stuff that I've never, ever heard before or from anyone else. So you're definitely unique in that fashion. Because I'm cheap and I do the free Zoom, we only have about a half hour here. So I definitely want to talk on the legalization of drugs and the government's authority over whether or not what we should be able to put in our bodies, jury nullification. But before we do, this is a channel about cannabis and plant medicine, and us cannabis users, we believe in freedom, especially when it comes to this plant, a word that I don't think means what most people think it means. But can you, I guess before we start on legalization and jury nullification, I think we can tie that into some of the principles of anarchism and why we need to desperately understand what decentralization means.
Yeah, the biggest hurdle we have to any kind of freedom is not getting the right people into this system. That's not the biggest problem we have. That's the big giant distraction that goes on, that I spend so much time trying to pound into people's heads, that the Constitution is not a freedom machine. It's not the greatest system ever designed, and under no circumstances will getting the right people in there do anything. Sure, it'll make it a little tiny bit better, but ultimately it'll just always go back, because the way the system is set up, at least allegedly, that is so fundamentally screwed up, is that you have to keep a constant vigilant watch on it at all times. And of course, they're being paid full time to screw you, and they have all this endless money at their fingertips to hire people and to run systems to constantly come back again and again and again and again and again in order to get what they want. And I tell people all the time, they only have to win once, and then we're screwed. We have to win every single time, over and over and over and over and over and over, as they come in a million different ways. And that's why the fundamental misunderstanding about government is so key to try to correct. Government is not there to help us. It doesn't help us. And there are no circumstances when government operates outside of anything but consent. It's a fail. It's nothing but a criminal enterprise. And we don't have a consensual government by any stretch. And so the only real key, because there's not that many people like you and me and the people who listen to your show who are actually relatively intelligent, can catch on to things. The vast majority of people are pretty dumb, and a huge number are brainwashed. And so any kind of system that tries to supposedly have control over very large groups of people is always going to be a tyrannous system. It's never going to be anything but that. And so the first step is understanding that if you're going to have government, because we got so many idiots that we can't convince that we don't need a government, if we're going to have that, it has to be as small as possible, because it's always going to be ultimately kind of a corrupt institution with no real decent personal consequence to misbehaving inside government. And so you have to limit down the amount of government there is. And the Constitution doesn't do that. If it did, we wouldn't have the largest government the world has ever seen under the Constitution. Those two are totally impossible together. So whatever the people imagine that we need to get back to its basic principles, it clearly can't work, because for 250 years it's grown and grown. And so we have to have a much, much smaller, much more decentralized system. It's the only way to work. If people say all the time, well, my vote can make a difference at the local level. Well, maybe some tiny amount of difference at a local level. But even at the local level, the amount of representation you have is often not even as much representation as the so-called founders had at the federal level when the Constitution was ratified. That's how horribly watered down everybody's vote is. And it's an issue that never gets talked about, that the level of representation, even if it was good, is so watered down now at 750,000 people per one representative that it's completely ludicrous. And decentralization is just another way of getting more representation. And so it's true that if you can't get full agreement by people, it's still, I'm not in favor of it, but just think how different the world would be if they had to get, say, 80%, every candidate who ran had to get 80% of the people, at least 80% of the people had to vote. So if you have to have at least 80% voting and you have to get at least 80% of them, you're going to have a tremendous amount of basic agreement about things. And then when they actually got up there, they had to get laws passed with, say, 80% approval. Well, most laws don't have that. Overwhelming support for a law might be 55%. They run around and tout polls. Oh, there's 62% approval. It's overwhelming. That is not overwhelming approval by any stretch of the imagination. And so decentralization helps all of those issues and makes the government actually something that you can keep a watch over. As it is, it's totally impossible.
Mm. Yeah, it's a concept that I've learned more about in the last few years, especially from your show and Rothbard and Spooner, and reading some of these guys that has really hit home. And trying to I have conversations. I volunteer at a bird rehab, and there's a lot of high school kids there, so I just ask them questions all the time, and some of them just can't understand the concepts because they're either too young, they're not out there in the real world. But it is something that I think more and more people are further away from realizing how big this behemoth it never goes in the other direction.
Ever.
It gets bigger and bigger.
Ever. It's 250 years of evidence. I don't understand how many different lives back to back do there have to be where it only moves in one direction, and the Republicans get control and the Democrats get control and the Whigs get control and the anti-federalists and all this miscellaneous parties that used to exist. It always moves in one direction. When the Republicans get control, who are supposedly conservatives, do they massively repeal all the stuff? No, they never massively repeal any of these programs. In fact, they just double down on them. And so the idea that it can ever move, that's not true. And the evidence is now crystal clear whether or not the intention in the beginning when this thing was formed was what we're looking at now, which is my personal belief. That's what they intended. They knew exactly what they were doing, or whether they had the best of intentions is ultimately a moot point now, because it's proven what it is and what it does. And it's not like our country stands out and all these other countries are making it work. There's no country where a government gets formed and then it shrinks and the people's rights grow over time. Every single government of every single type is there only two things. They either start out as a totalitarian regime and they never change, or they start smaller and they grow. That's it. That's every single time the direction is exactly the same. And to continue to believe that somehow you're going to buck this system when literally it's happening all over the world all the time for hundreds of years is a delusion that's so ridiculous that it just can't be entertained any longer.
So I guess let's get into jury nullification, something you're, I'd say, pretty much an expert on.
I'm a huge fan of it, because what people don't understand about the jury is that regardless of how big the government is, how ridiculous the government is, or how small the government is, ultimately, all the government is, these representative governments that are phony baloney representation, they are a compromise to actually having everybody meet in a room and get to agree to do something or not. And when you can't have that actually occurring and you don't have any option because there's government all over the world, the reason the jury works is that anything the government does, it's supposed to have the consent of the people. If the government is doing things without the consent of the people, then there is literally no difference between it and a criminal organization. And to say that you took a vote and a few extra people agreed to it and a few didn't, that doesn't matter. That doesn't work in any other form of life. You would have to very first agree that you're going to have a vote, that you will live with the results, even if it's just 5-4. Okay, I'll live with the 5-4. You're in a room, you got 9 people, you look around, you know these people. It's like, okay, I'd be willing to live with a vote. We'll take the vote. And if you come up short, you live with it. Okay, that's fine, but that's not what you get in ours. They force you to live with a vote I've never agreed to live with, which is that they decide who gets to vote, how they're going to vote, when they vote, and then who they get to vote for. And then the people who you elect go up and make votes that I have no say in, and they don't have to do anything they say. So that doesn't work. The reason that jury nullification is a complete and total veto of all that is that that's the opportunity. It's a political part of our system. It's not just part of the justice system. It's the way the people who have no other say get to have a say. And that is, I have a minority position. Basically, every position I hold is a minority position. It's totally and completely impossible for my position to ever carry the day in Congress or any other governmental system. It can never work because just not enough people believe what I believe and want what I want. And so I have no representation, except for when I go and sit in a jury box and the government has dreamed up a law and said that if you violate this thing we wrote down, then you can be punished by the government. The jury system is such that you have to get unanimous agreement of 12 randomly drawn citizens who then get to vote on whether or not they think something like that is something that they want to punish as a violation of the law. And if they don't, well, then the government can't get a conviction. And so the law is dead letter. And once you can start understanding that that works in both civil and criminal cases, because the government stirs up the Department of Justice, which didn't even exist until after the Civil War. And now we're supposed to believe that the people agree to have this endless cadre of lawyers with infinite amounts of money going around imposing and enforcing these infinite amount of laws that nobody can know what they are in government courts. And that's something we agreed to. Well, that's not something that anybody agreed to in their right mind. Nobody would. And the check on it is the jury. That's why you have a constitutional right to a jury trial, because the government, regardless of how corrupt it is, regardless of how bad the prosecutors are, regardless of how bad the judges are, if people understand what juries are supposed to actually do, then the people remain in control. And you don't have to have these majorities in order to win. All you have to have is one person who goes in there, hears the case and says, that's a bunch of bullshit. I don't agree that that should be against the law. Not guilty. That's it. Now, you don't get an acquittal. All you can get is a hung jury. It's true the government would theoretically be able to try you again, but believe me, the system is so overwhelmed and backed up. If they start getting these types of hung juries at any pace at all, then they're not going to be able to continue because you have speedy trial requirements, and the prosecutors will simply be overwhelmed, and the witnesses they rely on, they'll all disappear. If it takes years and years and years to get to trial, it won't work. And so we only need a very small group of people, between 5 and 10% of the population, to understand it in order to bring all of it to a halt. And it happens in every kind of form and fashion. It's not just drug laws. They're not the only ones that you could easily nullify. Any of these bogus tax laws where they just want to tax people for this and that, out the window. All these phony baloney gun laws, out the window. All these phony baloney anti-speech laws, out the window. They couldn't get convictions in any form or fashion in criminal courts, and they couldn't get any kind of civil judgments against you. And so you'd have nothing to fear from the government that steps so far outside of line if the people understood. And if people can grasp this concept, because it's a big concept for people to break through on, because the brainwashing is so intense about the judge giving you the law, the jury just being there to determine the facts. There's so much brainwashing around that. But if people can just see how powerful this is, we don't have to do all this organizing. We don't have to get all these groups and knock doors and make sure that your representative is properly primaried, and you send him checks, and then you got to check his voting record. You don't have to worry how corrupt they are. None of that matters. It all falls away to, well, look, they've got to go down there and get the people to agree to this, and the people don't agree to it, so it's not going to work. And so they don't have to fear being arrested. They don't have to fear being threatened with prosecutions. They don't have to fear being bankrupted, having to go get a lawyer to defend themselves against a bunch of crap. They just be able to go in, know that they have 12 of their own citizens sitting in there. They could tell their story and just say, this is outrageous. This could be you. This is not reasonable. And you only have to convince one of those people in there to say, yeah, I agree. This is ridiculous. This is over the top. And you're safe. And if you think about all the different laws and how much division there is about what people can agree to and what they can't agree to, and you read the news, even what they're telling us, the country's massively split. Well, that just tells you they wouldn't be able to enforce basically any of the laws they have on the books outside of things like murder, rape, robbery, stuff people actually want enforced. All the rest of it, these made up things, all this woke crap and all these phony baloney, regulatory this and that the EPA passes, the FDA passes, the Department of Transportation passes. None of those things could ever possibly be enforced. And that would be it. We'd be free from it. And once you're free from it, then we'd have enough time to be able to re-educate people in other ways, so we could get the decentralization method out there and people could start seeing it. And that's why it's a key, because it could actually buy us a sufficient amount of time to try to make some other changes, because we have so little time left before the doors close.
I heard a jury nullification. I didn't know what it was, but years ago, Doug Stanhope, comedian, had a joke where he said, I was on a jury and this guy was being tried for drunk driving. And I was like, you know what? This guy seems pretty cool. I'm just going to say no, because I don't think, and I think it was more of a joke than it was trying to tell us what jury nullification was. But that the idea of jury nullification in that setting always stuck with me. And then through your show was the first time I heard jury nullification. It's like the light bulb goes off, and
it does, right? If you've got a brain, once you see, oh wow, this is how the people actually get to stay in charge. And drunk driving is a classic example. They have all these DWI task force, the federal government finances, and drunk driving this and drunk driving that. There's tons of terrible drivers. If this is about bad drivers, okay, that's fine. I want to be safe from bad drivers too, but someone who just happens to not use their turn signal, and the cop pulls them over and they just happen to be over the so-called legal limit. Lots of alcoholics have absolutely no problem at all driving over that legal limit. And if it's really about being safe, then okay, let's make it about being safe. To me, I would even be okay with a driver's license. You go down, you take the thing on a simulator. They've got fantastic simulators. You got to make the driving test way, way harder than it is now. Any loser can pass that thing now. And that's why there's so many bad drivers out there. Make the thing very, very difficult to pass. and you can go take that simulated driving exam as drunk, as stoned, as messed up as you want. Okay, they draw your blood out, they take your levels. If you pass the thing, well, you're just as good a driver as anyone else they're letting on the road. So if this is about safety, obviously you're just as good, completely stoned out of your mind, as the little old lady down the road is who can't drive, or the dumbass who's constantly texting that can't drive. If it's about safety, then we can address safety, but it's not about safety. It's about all these other things. And so to me, just pointing it out right there, if I'm in a DWI jury and the guy hasn't done anything, and you have to go through this thing and they're trying to show you, well, he blew a 0.07 and that's over the legal limit by X amount. And, you know, if it had taken the thing 15 minutes later, he would have been under the legal amount. Those are all made up. They aren't about public safety. See, that's not about public safety. And they sell it as public safety, but in fact, it's not about public safety. And it's just the typical way they're incredibly disingenuous. And again, if you're on there and you think, well, this guy's obviously driving like a complete idiot. I don't care if he's drunk or not drunk. It's the behavior in the car that bothers me, not whether the guy's drinking or not, whether he's pissed off. If he's driving like an idiot because he's mad and he's trying to show off for his friends, or he's racing with his friends and he's sober as hell, does that make it better? No, it doesn't change it at all, right? And so if he's driving fine and he's over the legal limit and he's not posing a threat to anybody, I don't understand. How is it a crime? It's a crime because of all the reasons all these other things are so-called crimes. It's made up, and it's not an actual crime because there's no mens rea.
I think we've hit a lot on jury nullification. I want to get into legalizing drugs, or the legalization of drugs. And first, I want to start with a story. I'm not a medical marijuana card holder. I'm a black market supporter. I don't have any. I mean, I'm sure I could get diagnosed with an ailment if I pay money to the system. And a lot of my gripes with medical marijuana is the system in general. I'm here in Florida. It's $100 for the 125 for the license. You got to pay the doctor 100. You got to give him his cut. And I understand for certain people it is a medicine, and they don't have a guy like I have a guy that they can go and get weed from. But we interviewed someone that was pulled over and arrested, allegedly charged with a felony, because she couldn't provide the receipt with where she got her vape pen from. And she's a medical marijuana card holder. So whenever I get pushback from the medical marijuana community as to why I don't have a card, that's one of the examples I give. I give this show as an example. I can talk about many aspects of cannabis and marijuana that can shine a light on these things, these injustices. I don't think me getting a lot of what I'm told is I need to be in the system so I can be a statistic, so that as a statistic, I can get more people in the system, draw more people in. And I always return with, I don't think the system is a great system at all. I don't want to be a part of the system. So I think there's a tremendous misunderstanding as to freedom. And I'll lead that into, does the government have any authority when it comes to what they can tell us to put in our bodies or not?
Well, I mean, I guess it just all depends on the way people see the government and the authority, which of course is the ultimate thing I try to make my show about. The entire way the issue's framed up, that drugs need to be legalized. Now, it's completely, again, a totally upside down thing. There's no authority to criminalize them. There's none. The very fact that we're sitting here having to fight the government to try to get the things legalized shows you how totally out of control the government is. The government has absolutely no authority whatsoever to control what goes in somebody's body. And all of these arguments about whether or not the drug is safe or shouldn't be safe and could be controlled and could be medical, those are all distractions. There first has to be some kind of authority that somebody's given the government, that they have the right to arbitrarily choose what I can or can't do when it comes to me and my body. It's idiotic. And there's absolutely nothing at the federal level whatsoever. And I give people the example all the time that 100 years ago, they had to pass a constitutional amendment in order to outlaw alcohol. Why? Why did they have to do that? Why was an amendment necessary? There's no possible explanation for it except that the government knew it didn't have the authority, didn't have the fundamental authority to do something like that. And then they had to pass a constitutional amendment to get rid of that constitutional amendment so they could make sure that it wasn't ever outlawed again like that without a constitutional amendment. Yet people accept this idea that the Department of Justice, in effect, just creates a list of things they want to outlaw and puts them in a schedule however they care to, and just writes it down. And then it becomes illegal to have it, to maintain it, to take it, to sell it. They can't see that obviously the federal government does not have that authority. It's so incredibly clear. There's literally nothing else you need to know than something people already know, which is that they had to pass a constitutional amendment to outlaw alcohol. Why didn't they just put it on a schedule? Why didn't they just declare it illegal? Why didn't they? Because they couldn't. They knew they couldn't. People used to know they couldn't. But 100 years goes by and brainwashing goes on, and they dream all these things up like the FDA, which again is something they have absolutely no authority to operate. None. They don't have any authority over overseeing safety of drugs. That doesn't make any sense. They don't have any authority over disease, the CDC. They don't have any authority over these things. And that's the fundamental problem, is these constitutional conservatives, they always want to argue about certain kinds of things and make everything into a policy matter. And just because drugs may ruin neighborhoods, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't think it's the drugs themselves that are ruining the neighborhoods. I think the drugs are a symptom of all sorts of other things that destroy those neighborhoods. But anyone can look and see the white neighborhoods that they sell into, which is where the vast majority of drugs are consumed. And those neighborhoods aren't wrecked by drugs. And yet there they are. The guys are snorting coke at the office. The kids are microdosing. They used to drop lewds when I was a kid. They do all sorts of drugs. They're all smoking pot. Well, the neighborhood's completely fine. You'd have no idea that anything is going, oh, well, they're having overdoses. Well, so what? You can kill yourself by drinking too much water. You can kill yourself by drinking too much water. So I don't understand. It's like, where do you draw the line? And so the problem with all of these legalization arguments to me is, like I said, it's flipped upside down. Everything needs to be, first you have to show me where they get the authority to do it. It's not a matter of me having to prove why it needs to be legalized. There needs to be some kind of discussion about where in the world the government gets the authority to do any of these things. Where? And the problem is there is nothing. At the state level, they can claim that they have these so-called police powers, which supposedly give them authority to do anything for the so-called general welfare. There is some so-called legal authority on that, but it's all made up. It's still ultimately just the government giving it to the government, and it's not true. But at the federal level, there's literally no authority at all. None. Not a tiny bit, not some, well, maybe in this case, there's none. And that's just too much for the vast majority of people to grasp. They just can't grasp that it's that far gone.
It's true. It's very difficult for people to understand that, a red pill, if you will.
Right. Because they genuinely think, well, there is a problem. Do we want people destroying their lives? Well, no, I don't. Well, guess what? The government destroys people's lives all the time. So I don't understand. You're picking out drugs or something. What about these people, the fast food restaurant on every corner? They're eating themselves into a coma. They'll sell you endless poison garbage at the store and subsidize it, and then they'll turn around and tell you that you can't have drugs. Alcohol is tremendously more harmful than just smoking pot. Way more harmful. And if you just turn it into an edible, is almost nothing that that cannabis can do to you. It just has like almost no negative effects at all. Alcohol, there's no way to consume it. It's a slow poison. It will fuck you up, period. It will. Any amount is still not good for you. And it's true they can argue about the wine and this, but then again, you're sitting there arguing about policy as opposed to discussing the fact that you can't give this authority to government, and the government has never been given the authority. So until the people overwhelmingly agree that they want a nanny, a professional nanny called government, to pick and choose what they want to do, there's no authority to outlaw it. That's all. There isn't.
It seems like that's what people want, is a nanny.
Yes, this is the problem. This is why jury nullification is so essential, because you're always going to have this large group of idiots out there. The vast majority of the population is just a bunch of NPC drones. And so they're going to push for all that. But with jury nullification, the beauty is they can try to outlaw whatever they want. But there's enough people who are clear thinking. You're going to get 1 out of 12 on there. You're going to. That's just 8% of the population. That's a very small group of people. And you really don't even have to have 1 on every jury. You only have to have 1 on a lot of the juries in order for the system to come to a halt. Because once they start getting a bunch of not guilties and they get a bunch of hung juries, it's out. And believe me, if you could activate the so-called community, the Black people who are fantastically misled, and their entire culture is completely destroyed by the government through both drug laws and welfare laws and all this different miscellaneous crap. If you could stimulate them and the churches to understand jury nullification, oh my God, this whole system would come to a halt. They would not be able to do anything. All these drugs and gun laws and all this other crap. Nobody wants gangs running around in their neighborhood causing problems, but those things occur because the stuff is illegal. And so what they're doing is operating the other side of the law. I don't see pharmacists, people wanting to kick pharmacists out of their neighborhood. I don't see that. They're big drug pushers. I don't see them trying to push doctors out of their neighborhoods for pushing drugs. I don't see it. Why? Because they don't cause crime. Why? Because everybody operates inside a system where it's legal. And as soon as you make it illegal, well, you're going to have problems. That's it. You're going to have problems.
I've considered going down to the courthouse with a camera, standing on the other side of the road and, doing some kind of video, handing out flyers about jury nullification, but haven't gotten there yet. But
yeah, well, there's a lot of organizations that do it, and you do often get arrested, moved, and pushed around and stuff like that. The Fully Informed Jury Association feeds you. They're a good organization. They do a lot of that kind of opening people's minds to it, and of course, they get a lot of hassle because it's just an issue that. See, there's no way for them to get out of the box they've created. I try to take the box and turn it on them. The box is that we're the greatest, freest Constitution, blah, blah, people are in charge, justice system's the greatest in the world, and the people get to sit in the jury and just, okay, well, great. All right. So there's no way they can back that out and take jury trials away and maintain the fantasy narrative they have going. So if you can take that main piece of it and flip it on them, and show people, okay, you're right, the people are in charge, and we're going to take it over again. They don't really have a method to be able to use the system they have created. This decades and decades and decades and decades and decades of brainwashing gets turned against them as soon as people's eyes are open. And again, we don't need a majority. We only need a tiny group of people.
Right. All right, we got about 5 minutes left, so I got one last question for you, legal man.
Okay, great.
Are cats anarchists?
Well, I mean, Ernest Hemingway would tell you that they are the best are anarchists. I love cats. I love dogs too, but dogs are just a very different kind of animal, and I get a kick out of cats. I think they've become a lot more popular in the last few years, but I just love their attitude that they just aren't going to be ruled. They push stuff off whenever they want to. They cause havoc, and they just have an attitude that's very different than a dog's attitude. And they are a funny animal to me.
I have 3 cats. We rescued all 3 of them. One of them just down the street. She was 8 ounces when we found her. And
wow.
She is, we used to spray her with the bottle until she said, well, I don't care. And you just spray and spray and spray, and then she wouldn't. And I've built shelves up the wall and all kinds of aerial acrobatic stuff for her, and she wants to do whatever she wants to do. And so you gotta love him for it.
You really do. I mean, anybody who's a big lover of freedom, they normally do like cats just because of their attitude. The very fact that just like that, where they get sprayed. I've had cats like that too, where they just kind of start squinting and you just kind of squirting. It's like, okay, well, if this is the worst that's going to happen, this is the worst that's going to happen. And I remember the story is always told. My mother tells me the story. I was a very resistant child. Had a lot of problems, like a cat, and I don't like authority. And she would say, "You can't do this again." And I would ask him when I was a lit's kid. I'd say, "Well, what's going to happen?" And she'd be like, "Okay, that's going to be 7 licks. So I'm going to get 7 spankings for that kind of thing." And she said, I would sit there and I'd think about it. And a lot of times I'd be like, okay, it's worth it. And I just do it and just get in trouble. And it's just kind of like the cat. It's like, okay, if the worst is going to happen is I'm going to get sprayed with a water bottle. Yeah, I want to jump up there. I'll take it. I'll take a spraying for that.
I think that's a great way to end this episode. If you like content like this, make sure you go down and leave a comment below with your thoughts on our government and this system that's completely out of control, jury nullification, and I guess cats being anarchists. So, Legalman, thanks again. Tell everybody the best place they can find you.
If you want to find me, the easiest place is probably on my Twitter account at Legalman at US Crime Review, or if you want to listen to my podcast, it's pretty much available in any podcast player. It's called The Quash, and people can find me through either of those methods. And I did want to say that the Jones Plantation movie is coming out in early April. So hopefully people will like that and watch it. I know that we've been telling people, the sky's falling for months and months and months that it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So I'm just getting a lot of cynical about it, but it is definitely coming out in early April. I've gotten confirmation from Andrew, and I hope people like that movie. I think it's a great way to potentially reach people on these kinds of things and open their mind and just start at least getting a toehold on there.
Yeah, it's a great allegory. I remember seeing the original Jones Plantation years back, and I can't wait to share the trailers and all the memes and stuff that come from it. So highly recommend the Quash podcast. Go check it out. If you found value in this episode, share it with somebody, and of course hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff, because it helps us get amazing guests like Legalman. So Legalman, thank you again, my friend.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode. Peace and love, everybody. Catch you on the next one.